Last month, we had one in Springfield that was held in person. We're also holding another in-person session in Boston next week. We have these 2 remote sessions today, this morning and this evening. Please stay tuned for announcements of other sessions that may come up in the future. After we get all of these oral comments, as I said before, EEA will review all of the oral and written comments that are coming in. Written comments can be submitted through the Environmental Justice Strategy website. And as Carleen mentioned, there is both a way to submit general written comments through an email form or through the survey, through which a link is available on the EJ Strategy website. That link will also be in an email that Carleen will send around after this session today, which has particular questions that we are especially curious about. If you're short on time, the survey may be the best way to go in terms of commenting on the strategy. After we get all of the comments in, EEA will edit and also put out a response to comments. And the release of the final strategy will be later this spring. Next slide, please, Carmen. As we stated before, the draft EJ strategy is available in a number of languages. Other languages can be available upon request. Our overriding mission here is to make this document available to as many people as possible. Next slide, please, Carleen. Just want to just check to see the view, Carleen. I just received an email that somebody's having trouble with the view. Are we good? Is there anybody who's able to verify that? Okay, I'm sorry. I think we're okay. This slide, pardon that interruption. This slide is an overview of the EEA offices and agencies that are developing the strategy. EEA is an umbrella government agency, and this slide gives a description of the smaller agencies and offices that it encompasses. Each of these organizations has its own mission and job. For the strategy, each of the smaller agencies created their own chapter. We combined the chapters together and created one strategy for the entire Secretariat. Basically, these chapters cover agriculture, climate, energy, and environment in Massachusetts. Next slide, please, Carleen. In putting the strategy together, we required all of the agencies to do the following: promote environmental justice in all neighborhoods in the Commonwealth, find a way to integrate EJ considerations into all of the departments through their policies, programs, and other ways of doing business, identify and promote agency-sponsored projects, funding decisions, rulemakings and regulation development, and any other actions that can further environmental justice throughout the Commonwealth. We need to find, very importantly, a way to demonstrate the fair distribution of benefits. How are we going to measure these? How will we have a baseline and then be able to chart our progress as we move forward? That is a basic function of this EJ strategy, and one that I hope that you will weigh in on today. As I said before, we consolidated all these chapters into one EJ strategy, and it will be issued by the secretary later this spring. Next slide, please. Here is a listing of our Fearless Task Force that actually put the strategy together. It was developed by these 20 members of the Environmental Justice Task Force, which was convened in September 2020. You can see here the number of agencies these individuals represent and their areas of expertise. Next slide, please, Carlene. In the spring of 2021, we held focus sessions with the public to talk about issues that concerned them about climate, energy, environment, and agriculture. In those listening sessions, which were extremely helpful to us as the beginning of this process, we received input from approximately 200 people. A lot of that information went into this draft document that you see today. Next slide, please, Carlene. The structure of the strategy is as follows. There's a section where there are items in common between all of the agencies. Then each agency also has a section where they have tailored the strategy to their individual missions. So as I said before, the metrics is an issue that is in common between all of the agencies. It's very important how we measure environmental harm in a neighborhood so that when we are doing work there, we know when there has been an improvement is something that we are prioritizing in this strategy. We care about equity in hiring. We care about outreach and communication. And we also care about all of these agencies starting a comprehensive training initiative for staff, both internally as well as external initiatives to stakeholders. Some things that are specific to each agencies are the individualized grants, enforcement obligations of each agency, and cumulative impact analysis when it's required. Also, any technical assistance that agencies can give to residents of the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. The purpose of these listening sessions is to obtain your help and your input. We would like very much to have comment on how we can best reach out to folks and to continue the work that we started in terms of communication, outreach, and community engagement. Second, another pressing issue is how we can measure progress in your neighborhood. Anything else that the EJ strategy brings to mind will also be valuable for us to know about. Next slide, please, Carlene. So we'd like to open it up now for public comment. Carlene has stated that we're limiting comment time to 2 minutes, but we do seem to have enough time, I think, for people to have everything said that they need to say, and certainly there can be a second showing of hands if that's what people want to add to their original comment. So at this point, I'll open it up. Carlene will call on you when she sees your hand, and we'll be taking notes as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rishi. I see that we have one hand raised. It's Elliot Smith. Elliot, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning, Mr. Smith. Could you please state your full name and affiliation, then proceed with your comment?
Absolutely. My name is Elliot Evan Smith. I am a resident of Lynn, Massachusetts, and I'm affiliated with North Shore Community College as well as UNAM Boston. I work for both of those places, and my comments are, well, as a resident of an environmental justice community, Lynn, I believe that the environmental justice strategy of the state must require companies to use the best technologies available to limit negative health and environmental impacts, especially on already overburdened communities. The strategy should not ignore the cumulative effects of pollution. In Lynn, there are many different sources of pollution, right? We have General Electric, we have airplanes, we have traffic, we have oil spills. But the most egregious is the wind waste Wheelabrator trash incinerator and unlined ash dump located in Saugus, Massachusetts, just across the Saugus River from Lynn. The incinerator itself is about 50 years old, making it the oldest incinerator in the country. It has experienced numerous fires, breakdowns, spills, and other malfunctions, even getting sued by the state in 2012 for allegedly spilling 8,000 gallons of ash sludge into the parking lot and wetlands. Furthermore, it's underperforming. It doesn't meet modern standards for nitrogen oxides. The state standard is 150 particles per million, but the facility is allowed to pollute at 185 particles per million and buy credits to compensate for its excessive emissions. And as a point of reference, new incinerators pollute at 45 particles per million. So if you compare 185 particles per million to 45, it's quite a difference. This is unacceptable and represents a threat to the health and environment of communities like Lynn, Revere, and Saugus that are already overburdened by pollution. Additionally, the wind waste ash dump is the last unlined landfill in the state. In other words, all landfills in the state have multiple layers of plastic liners with clay in between, intended to prevent waste and leachate from leaking into the ground or groundwater. The Saugus facility doesn't have any of this. It sits in a supposedly protected wetland in an area of critical environmental concern. Additionally, the dump is uncovered. Olin College of Engineering has placed air monitors in Gibson Park and Revere across from the facility. And with 2 years of data, they have demonstrated that not only is pollution coming over from the incinerator, but ash is blowing over from the uncovered ash dump. So neighbors in Lynn, Saugus, and Revere have been saying for years that ash blows over onto their homes and cars, that they're constantly cleaning this ash. However, Mass DEP and the company Wind Waste have denied this for years, saying it's impossible. Now we have the evidence to demonstrate that it is in fact happening, that ash is getting everywhere. To end, I would like to ask the state to please maintain the ACEC law and require Wind Waste to close their outdated ash dump as scheduled. It's scheduled to close in the next few years. Mass DEP says they're going to stick to that they're going to close it. We hope the new administration and your team will ensure its closure and keep your promises. Originally, the ash dump was slated to close in 1996, and here we are in 2023. Furthermore, the incinerator should be held to higher emissions standards. And finally, we should move towards its eventual closure by embracing zero waste alternatives such as composting, better recycling, better enforcement of recycling, and waste reduction. Zero waste has to be the future because I don't know about you, but I don't like to breathe my trash and have incinerator ash blowing all around my community. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That was a lot of valuable information. Thank you for that.
I don't see any hands raised right now. So if anyone has any questions or comment, please raise your hand. Susan P., I will promote you to panelist. Good morning, Susan. Would you please unmute yourself?
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it. My name's Susan Purser. I'm with 350 Mass Berkshires. It's a climate group, part of the statewide 350 Massachusetts. My comments today are that oftentimes the state agencies are asking local organizations to publicize programs or issues, but they don't provide any resources for these small organizations to carry that out. You know, no posters or interpreted literature. So the small local organizations that I hear from are saying, you know, it's great that they're being in touch with us, but they just don't give us any resources to then publicize whatever issue it is. I think the main point is that state agencies need to form working relationships with local grassroots organizations, such as religious groups, political leaders, grassroots organizations, to set up communication lines. Technology limitations are another area. A lot of lower income folks do not have computers at home or don't have the, you know, the tech expertise to deal with the Zoom calls. So definitely lack of home computers is a problem. You know, you could have a Zoom call from a local community organization and have people come to that Zoom call. That would be another option if the organization had the computer expertise to do that. That would be another option. What I also hear is that there needs to be more lead time before meetings to organize access to technology. Excuse me. So more lead time than just, let's say, 2 weeks, so that meetings could be set up, or, you know, local Zoom meetings could be set up, or transportation organized to go to in-person meetings. I think the EJ community has more challenges with transportation, and just making time, like babysitting and other means that help them to attend meetings. And of course, the language limitations are another problem. I'm glad to see there are various interpreters here today. That's great. But there needs to be not only Spanish interpretation, but let's say in Springfield, they would need more Russian interpretation and Vietnamese language interpretation also at some of these meetings. So I think it's important to try to identify what are the major language groups in a particular area and try to provide the translators for that. So in conclusion, I would just say that state agencies need to set up stronger relationships with local grassroots groups and also give them the resources that they need to help publicize and with issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Purser. I just wonder, could you, you had mentioned flyers and translations. Are there other specific types of resources that would be helpful?
Well, not specifically that I have right at hand, but I just know that our local groups out in the Berkshires often get requests from state agencies to, you know, sort of informally survey people about, I don't know, heating sources or who knows what, access to food, and they just don't, they're already overburdened with a lot of tasks. These small groups are already functioning on very limited resources. And so asking them to do more when they're not given, you know, money or outreach resources is difficult for these small groups.
Thank you. Thank you for all that information.
Next, we have Maria Hotelet. Maria, I am going to promote you to panelist.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm very grateful that you're having this session today. I was prompted to ask my question after hearing Elliot Smith's comment about the ash blowing in Saugus and Lynn from the incinerator. His comment, he spontaneously suggested that we need more composting happening in our state. And my business is focusing on doing composting to feed organic farms. So I think the environmental justice issue is very complicated because there are so many components that come into the inequity that exists in our state. So, you know, obviously breathing dirty air is not good for anyone, but we also need access to healthy food from healthy soil. So I am a collaborator of Mohammed Hanan, who has started Hanan Agro Farms in Lincoln, Massachusetts, which obviously Lincoln is not an environmental justice community, but it does have pretty clean air and water. He is struggling immensely in order to grow organic food, in order to serve environmental justice populations that don't have access to healthy air or water. But he is having a very difficult time accessing grants through MDAR in order to support the work, you know, basic infrastructures that he needs in order to grow his healthy food. So my business is called We Capture Carbon, and I use healthy microorganisms to facilitate the rapid composting, and he needs my technology. One thing Elliot Smith said was that we need the best technologies to be accessible to our environmental justice frontline workers, of which I consider Mohammed to be one. But we need to do composting on his farm in order to grow healthy food in the drought conditions that we are experiencing in this environment. And unless the state begins supporting big shifts in the right direction, then we will continue to have these long-standing problems. He has applied 2 times for an MDAR grant and has been unable to win a grant for the basic infrastructure that he needs for his farm. And after failing to win the grants, he receives 0 feedback on what he could do better to successfully win the grant. And as a man who did not come to this country with English, from birth, he is working very hard and having many struggles navigating this curious, confusing system that we have in Massachusetts. So with that said, the collaboration that we wish to do can do quite a lot of good within the community, but we need to figure out how to access the funds that the state is trying to offer to support this pioneering work. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Hotla, and nice to meet you on screen at least. I know we've exchanged emails before. I'm wondering if you could just provide a few details on what you might think might make the grant process easier or more accessible to people who are wanting to participate in that. I mean, there'll always be folks who win the grant and folks who need to try again, but what is it that we could do in terms of the process that could facilitate that application?
The way the online form works is you are given the boxes to write your information into. And from my perspective, being an outsider, I don't really know who reads the information that you put into the boxes or how they aggregate that information and compare one grant to another to decide who wins. But those boxes, I believe, are fairly limiting in the ability for, for example, in this case, a farmer to really tell the story of what it is that he is trying to accomplish. And the boxes are very small. And I have read very carefully what the questions were and what his responses were to those questions. And it just seems like a very, there's no places to put pictures or diagrams or charts. There's no place to put your data on how well where your farm started and where it has achieved a level of production. One thing that he and I are working on together is to create a survey in order to extract information about demographics from his current customers. He has many customers of probably many of which count as environmental justice customers. But without places to put that data that we collect and aggregate, it will be very hard for us to tell the story. Often these days we read our stories in slide presentation. I mean, you all presented a slide presentation, not, snippets in little bits of a form. And, we tell our stories on Instagram. We tell our stories visually these days. So it seems to me that the online form system is quite outdated. And I am not an expert on this sort of thing, but it seems like maybe there's ways to innovate the way the grant information is requested and then processed.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Because metrics are so important. I mean, at the beginning you were saying that. Yes. So, I mean, if the grant application form, provided fields where someone could say, well, where did you begin and what progress have you made? And if you could enter numbers into a spreadsheet in the application form to show people that you're paying attention to metrics, that you in fact actually have any metrics, and that you have begun to show that you can do something that provides value. I'm just, talking off my top of my head right now.
No, thank you. That's very informative. I mean, thank you so much for going into this detail. That is helpful to us to know the ways in which the correct information isn't able to be conveyed.
Yes. I think people should also get credit for building collaborations. In the form that Mohammed filled out, he has been asked, which environmental justice populations are you serving? And, which, he's been prompted, to demonstrate that he gives food away to people who need it. And there are people who need food, But how can a farmer build a farm when he is not even breaking even? He is losing money growing healthy organic food. And yet, in order to win the grant, he's sort of expected to give food away. So this economic model of, you know, I don't know how he can grow organic food, you know, get his business out from underwater and serve the state and people while building something brand new on a farm that laid fallow for many years. I mean, the land that he is trying to grow food on was empty for a long time. So if our state wants to be prepared for disasters, we need that farm to be working productively and in use, with the knowledge being maintained and the practices being maintained. But if some resources like this, you know, this incinerator in Lynn are allowed to exist for decades and decades, operating poorly, and yet we cannot support a farm to get up to speed on providing healthy food for our populations. To me, that seems like a very big problem. How can we let problems persist and yet we cannot support, you know, the development of a small farm that a farmer wants to farm in the best way possible? Accessing the resources is a real problem, which is why this panel is here. So I'm very glad that you are here to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. So if you do have any questions or comment, please raise your hand. Marianne, I will promote you to panelist.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, good morning. Could you please state your full name and affiliation, then proceed?
All right. My name is Marianne B. I'm from Westfield, Massachusetts. I'm a former city councilor and was a former director of Westfield Concerned Citizens. And I was just gonna listen today, and because I had participated in or attended the Springfield in-person event that you held on this very same topic. But since there might not be anybody else who have an extended amount of time, I'm happy to that you having this Zoom meeting, which gives the opportunity for more people to get involved that can't get to a meeting at a local venue. But my concern here is I think we're working on this draft copy that I have a copy of it here, a hard copy of it, that was worked on and that you are looking for input. And it's not anything that it will be an internal document, if that's what I understand. Maybe you can explain that too. But I want to agree with some of the comments that were already made and request that was made by the Ms. Purser, I guess, from Berkshire, about getting assistance or help to local organizations, grassroots communities that don't often have the resources. But I want to take it another step further, because I think I remember reading something in here about the goal, because my concern always is words on a paper are wonderful and they set the tone and explain what you want to do, but how do you make that happen? How are you going to implement it and enforce it? And what I gather from reading this, the beginning of it, is that this is just going to be a document that will be handled internally and that you will enforce it internally. You're trying to get suggestions from the public who have to deal with these environmental justice issues to give you some feedback on what is written here as to whether we are satisfied that it's going to get the job done. We have experienced 2 MEPA situations here in the city of Westfield that we were given input, and I'm not totally convinced yet that EJ populations are the requirements of addressing the issues before application or during application too have been put into practice the way it should be, and that all environmental populations within our city that will be impacted by some of these projects have had a chance to give the input. But that's something that we'll hopefully deal with, because we are in process of responding to an SEIR, and also have had an experience already with a draft EIR and a final ERI for another project. What I would like to suggest here is that something be done to educate and inform the local municipal government in cities and towns, especially ones here in our community where we don't have very strong grassroots organizations to communicate and do the job to educate the environmental justice populations, or to get them up to speed on what is happening and how some of these projects could impact them, and giving them the resources to be able to get their voices heard. At our local, sometimes at municipal governments, I don't know about any others across the state, but I can speak to our community. When some of this, when the roadmap bill was passed and it codified into law EJ participation, or attending to EJ populations and giving them a voice in the decision making of what happens to projects that are going to impact them and their quality of life and their air and their water and whatever, that they get to say something, they get to have a seat at the table. I brought this to the attention of the local government, and there are boards and commissions that deal with some of the projects that come before them for local permitting, but they also, the state government agencies also have a voice in that too. But the local, there seems to be a disconnect sometimes between what the state agencies are doing and the local government commissions and boards. I saw something briefly written in here about wanting local municipal governments to be a part of this process. So I don't know if there's going to be more detail, more education and information brought to the local government, either through the mayor's office or through the local councils and boards. Because when we went through this, they had an agenda item that asked, what is EJ? Who's responsible for doing anything with it? And where is it in the city? And they put it into a committee and studied it. And then the result of they came out and said, it's not our problem. It is a state regulation. The roadmap bill involves the state agencies. So we don't have to do anything with it at this point. How is it going to work if you don't get involvement and education at the local level with local boards and commissions and councils and mayors, city government, to help you by assisting you, because they know their community the best.
Yeah.
So you should be talking with them. They should be involved in this process. I don't know if anybody from a local government is in the state of Massachusetts is on this call or has taken the initiative to be paying attention to what you're trying to do here, because they should know what's happening at the state level. That's my opinion here. So I want to have meaningful involvement, but those people that we're ignoring right now that I see are not actively involved in this. And just because of my experience here, should be. So I don't know what your plan is to do outreach to the local municipal governments and agents, boards and commissions, to make sure that they understand what this is all about, because they function in the state of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. And it's nice to see you again. I remember speaking with you out in Springfield. So this is a very interesting point you're bringing up about this connection between the local boards and state government. And we'll definitely take this back and consider how to how to approach them. The municipal governments were certainly told about the development of the draft strategy, but I see your question and comment is going even beyond that. You're talking about implementation of these concepts that are in the strategy at the local level, how we can influence that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the time to speak today.
Thank you, Ms. Babinski. I don't see any other hand raised. So if you have any questions or comment, please raise your hand. Not seeing any hand raised. This is your opportunity to voice whatever concerns or issues you have. We're here to listen to you, so please, this is your time. I do see Mr. Vogel. I will promote you to panelist.
Hi, my name is.
I'm sorry, I called you Mr. Vogel. I apologize.
My name is. I'll put on my video too. I was trying to get away with not being on your video by just sending a question in the Q&A, but anyway, just to follow. So I'm a professor at UMass Amherst of geography. And I'm also on the board of the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. And in my role on the board of the Mass Rivers Alliance, I'm also on the Justice, Equity, Diversity, Access, and Inclusion Committee. So those are sort of the roles in which I engage with these kinds of issues. And I have focused especially on issues of flood resilience and hydropower. So just following up on a couple of the comments you've already gotten, I think a way to summarize one issue that I hear from several people and has also appeared in several places where I've seen work is many Massachusetts state agencies have just a limited capacity, which is understandable. We don't have infinite funding. We don't have infinite people. And in a region like Western Massachusetts, that means there's a lot that happens that state agencies just can't get into every community. And many of the communities are very small and sometimes only have a few paid staff people. And in a case like that, going straight to an EJ community or even straight to a municipality can be very difficult to make those connections for a state agency. So just something to keep in mind is that in order to be effective in some of these smaller and remote communities, you may need your agencies to actively work on relationships that extend beyond the individual agencies. And so, for example, out here in Western Massachusetts, the regional planning organizations often play a really key role. In other places, it may be a watershed group, or there may be agencies outside of EEA that are working more directly with EJ populations that aren't really tuned into environmental issues as much. So it's not, everything you're doing is fantastic. It's really wonderful. And it's going to be more effective if you're not. And you've got language in there of collaboration. It's in the strategy, but it's just going to be especially important in smaller communities where there's just neither the governmental nor the NGO nor the community sort of capacity and awareness to follow all the state agencies or for state agency personnel to get out to them. So it's great that you're saying each agency is responsible and EEA is thinking, but part of what you're going to need to do to be effective is to coordinate across agencies outside of the EEA into other state agencies and then into regional and local agencies as well. So I think that's just a general comment that I think you're hearing, as well as I forget the person from the Berkshires talking about more informal organizations. I think that that's sort of what you're hearing from numerous people today.
Professor Vogel, could you so you're saying to reach out to other sister state agencies who may be doing work out in these smaller Western Massachusetts towns, and through that avenue get at some of the environmental justice issues? Are you saying also, are you saying that that may be more effective than an EEA agency reaching out to that municipality on their own?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, I did some work with some collaborators in the Deerfield watershed, and there's just, really limited capacity of state agencies to get out to all 20 or so towns in the Deerfield watershed, whereas the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, has really strong relationships with all of those towns. So by building, just the state agencies already have collaborations with these organizations, but they may need to, work on, and I don't know, maybe you guys are already doing this, I don't know, but you may need to work on finding ways to build those collaborations across agencies, across, state, regional, local, with EJ in mind.
Thank you, that's very informative.
Thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you, Professor Vogel. I don't see any other hands raised. Please, if you have any questions or comments, raise your hand.
I'm just wondering, Carlene, could we get Professor Vogel to give again that example that she gave? There was one organization she said was working with the 20 towns out in Franklin. Is there a way we could do that, either through writing or I would just love to have that example that she gave.
I brought her back on the analyst. Professor Vogel?
Thanks, sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that, thank you.
So the one I mentioned is the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. We call it FRCOG out here, but it's one of the state regional planning organizations, right? So I haven't studied all the regional planning organizations around the state, but my impression is that different ones have really kind of different roles, and some of them are really more important than others. And I think the state agency personnel that work out in Western Mass sort of have a pretty good sense of that. But yeah, when we went out and we talked to community people following Tropical Storm Irene, which caused some really bad flooding devastation out here, we really heard that the state agencies were just very hard to get a hold of and remote, just because there's just not that much staffing. But FRCOG was absolutely crucial as an intermediary between state policy and these local communities that, again, often had just a handful of paid staff in the entire town. You know what I mean? Town of a few hundred people. So these kinds of issues. And then if you think about an environmental justice community, sometimes they're dispersed, sometimes they're remote, it's going to be hard for the state to go straight to that community, and even for the state to go straight to the town. So these intermediate organizations are really crucial, or these already established community organizations that have linkages.
That's very helpful information to us, because we're growing. I mean, we already are aware, but we're growing increasingly aware of the way that environmental justice issues in the western part of the state are different from the eastern part of the state. And I don't think it's any secret that the eastern part of the state has really captured our attention, in these years that we've been working towards it. So I am very interested in what you said. about there and the dynamic out there. So thank you for that.
Please raise your hand if you have any questions or comments. As I said before, this is your opportunity, so please go ahead and raise your hand. Elliot Smith, I will promote you to panelist.
Hi again.
Hi again.
I figured I'd talk more since it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people. Well, just to expand on some of the health issues that we deal with here in Lynn, we have a very high asthma rate, much higher than the state average. We also have high cancer rates, especially brain cancer. I did some door knocking in West Lynn in the neighborhoods closest to the waste incinerator. And many people, I know this is anecdotal, but many people we talked to were cancer survivors or had immediate family members who were cancer survivors. There's also high levels of learning disabilities and neurological issues, all sorts of issues that are commonly associated with incinerator, ash, and pollution. And some more context. So currently the landfill stands at 50 feet, okay? And Mass DP says that for it to expand beyond 50 feet, they would need to change the ACEC law. And what we're really concerned about is attempts by the Saugus Town government and other politicians to lobby in favor of changing this law. Because currently, the town of Saugus is proposing expansion for another 20 years. And basically what would happen is the ash landfill, it wouldn't go up like this. It wouldn't go straight up. It would be sloping. So it would become basically a giant pyramid of ash right in our backyard. And it's also very concerning because it's in the wetlands in a flood zone. And we're seeing increased storm frequency and intensity. And recently, a few weeks ago, there was a storm, and a friend of mine who lives in Revere took a picture, and actually you can see the train going by barely above the water, like a few feet above the water, and the incinerator right behind it on like an island, because it becomes an island basically when there's flooding. So we're extremely concerned about the future of this ash pile, what it's going to look like in the future, how it's going to be maintained once it is capped. There's a lot of issues around this, but our most immediate priority, we have a group in Lynn working on this. Our most immediate priority is the closure of the ash landfill because it's long overdue. As I mentioned before, it was supposed to close in 1996. Sorry if I spoke too fast. I forgot about the interpreters, but thank you guys again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Don't see anyone else. Again, please raise your hand. Thank you, Marianne. I'll promote you to panelist.
Hi, Marianne Babinski, Westfield, Mass. Again, I just want to say, because I think I mentioned this at the in-person meeting that you held too, is that I think this is a humongous undertaking, as somebody already mentioned, as a state agency trying to deal with many of the communities across the Commonwealth, especially in Western Massachusetts, as was brought up already, that you need, the assistance, I think, both at these regional organizations, as was mentioned for Western Massachusetts, and also at the state, at the local government, municipal level. I think that's an important piece too, Because if the reading of this document is that it's to get the information to and get input and an opportunity for EJ populations, the people that will be impacted by many of these development that's happening in their neighborhood. I participated in all those stakeholder meetings about the CIA, cumulative impact assessment, and that's what led to this too, I'm guessing. We have a series of events that happened over the last how many years. It was fighting for and getting the EJ executive order. Then from that executive order came working on and revamping and updating the EJ policy. What was always the problem with that was once the policy was put into effect was trying to get codified into law, EJ, and which happened when it was amended to the roadmap bill. And so we now have a law. But the issue always is, and that happens at local government too, you can have it on paper, but how do you implement it and how do you enforce it? That's a tricky question. You're trying to deal with the whole state. And I applaud you for the efforts of putting this document together, because to me, that's the piece that's important. How do you get people that work for these state agencies, that are involved with the state agencies and have a responsibility to now making sure that this law gets implemented and those EJ populations are taken care of. So, and that's going to be the internal document. So it's laying out here what you're expecting them to do. And I think whatever help or assistance you can get, and that's the suggestions that have been made, pointing out to you what's going on in some communities, issues that haven't been addressed for a very long time. How can we make that happen? Local, regional operations or local, regional, I want to say organizations can help you do that. And I think local government too, as I said before, they know their community the best. Westville's not just a little town with a small government. It has a lot more committees and boards and the council and a mayor. And it's a larger city. It has a large landmass here. I think it's if not but the second one in the city, in the state. So I would like to suggest that this is a good start. There's a lot of information in here, but the key thing always is words on a paper. How do we implement them and how do we get them enforced? And how do we get you help, as it was already mentioned, to make sure that you can take on this project and get the last step from EJ executive order to EJ policy update to now to getting the state agencies, individual state agencies get actively involved in knowing that it's their responsibility to promote this, to make sure that it happens. So I thank you and I applaud you for putting this together.
Thank you.
don't see any other hands raised. Please, again, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised, Rishi. I don't know if you want to say a few words to the attendees, but
we can give it another minute. If people have nothing more to say, we could adjourn this session if there's nothing more to say. Why don't we give it one more minute in case folks think of something or somebody signs on.
Mr. Elliot has raised his hand. I will promote you to panelist, Mr. Smith.
Hi. This time I won't talk about Wheeler-Brader wind waste, I promise. But composting or zero waste alternatives, really. So it's estimated that about 40% of what gets sent to landfills and incinerators are things that are recyclable and things that we could prevent from getting sent there by enforcing our recycling laws. Then about 30% of what gets incinerated or landfilled is compostable. So you see, up to 70% of what gets burned or landfilled are things that don't need to be, right? So I think zero waste needs to be really, really central to this strategy to reduce reduce our dependence on incineration as a state, especially, but also landfills. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo Elliot's comment on zero waste. We should not be burning valuable materials. We need to build in our state the strategies and structures for using the valuable materials for their highest purpose. So everything he said is very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
In addition to the zero waste strategies will build green jobs. So all of these pieces of our health in Massachusetts, whether it be economic, public health, clean air, clean water, all of these are connected, and we need to build the infrastructure and the culture. We need to build the culture in the state to be less wasteful and use the resources that we have and stop burning them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, I will promote you back to panelist.
Hi again. So just to add, right, these waste incinerators are called waste to energy, but as was just pointed out, it's a misnomer because we're literally burning all this valuable material that we could be putting to good use. I think the name waste to energy is just another attempt by this industry to greenwash us and pretend that they're doing such great things for the environment when in fact they're poisoning us and giving us cancer and asthma and destroying our communities. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Professor Vogel, I will promote you to panelist.
Yeah, so I thought since not that many people are here, I'd say one other thing. So I work a fair bit on the Connecticut River. And one of the things that just becomes really apparent is that there are a lot of marginalized or minoritized communities that depend on the river in not always recognized ways. So one, for example, is fishing, that people actually fish for food to supplement their income and their food security. And it's unclear to me how much that is recognized or valued by the state, but it's an example of a broader principle, which is that environmental amenities are not always just about protecting jobs or reducing pollution, but they can actually be part of people's livelihoods themselves. So that's just something to think about and to somehow, I wonder if there's a way to help us support those kinds of ways that people in the state may actually be using and depending on environmental, healthy environmental ecosystems in important ways that either have to do with their livelihood or their well-being, or just recognizing that in policy and practice more. And just another example is, there's a lot of the recreation industry around here that provides jobs that depends on healthy ecosystems. So anyway, just it seems like the protection of ecosystems is not always seen as, like, it's often seen as jobs versus environment, but often like livelihoods and healthy ecosystems are often actually linked.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marianne, I will promote you to panelist.
Thank you again. Just a quick, I just want to reference the document, the environmental justice strategy draft copy that you have, that I'm guessing this is working on. Whatever the issue across the state or in a local community, what they're dealing with environmental injustice, this plan, one of the statements that is made in here that I read, and I was also looking at the MIPA section, because that is something that has come to our community over the last 6 months or so. It mentions that any developer who wants to build a project in that community or has plans for that, which would require, let's say for this example, MIPA involvement, a MIPA review, that they have to do a pre-application outreach to EJ populations. What I don't understand, because the ones that we've experienced here, that I've experienced here and been involved in, is how does that get documented? How do we know it even happened? Who's responsible for doing that? Some of this, on the MIPA one, there's a chart that they have to, some of them, it's the proponent that is responsible for taking that step, and the steps that have been outlined on their section, the MIPA section. And then other cases, MIPA is supposed to be responsible for following through with an action that will make sure that EJ populations are being duly involved in the process and given voice. So when I have then responded to either a SEIR or a DEIR or an FEIR, it has been just vaguely, I would say vaguely represented that this had been done, or that proponents said that they took care of this, but there's no real record that I could see or find that that was happening. So I don't know how, again, I go back to, this is wonderful if this will happen, what you've put together here. This is something that I saw that was missing. We had a problem with state agencies, especially when there was a change in government leadership at the state level. And then a lot of these state agencies, the members of the agencies get removed and somebody new gets put in place, and they just say, wait a minute, we have to get up to speed. So you're going to be doing education, as far as this is document that I'm reading here says that the EEA will run programs to educate people in that are representatives of these state agencies to make sure that they are up to speed what you're trying to do here, that they know what the plan is. So that's going to be very helpful. I see that. So I don't know if that happened here for my situation, where I have been involved in some of these reviews up to this point, is when does this pre-application part take place?
So the answer to that is that that law began to be implemented on January 1st. And a number of these project proponents have come in to consult with MIPA and EJ together at EEA in terms of figuring out what needs to happen for a pre-filing community engagement piece. So this has been something that started to be implemented this year. There's 2 protocols that were also put out by the MIPA office. One was an environmental justice stakeholder engagement protocol, a public participation protocol. Another one was about environmental justice analysis in the MIPA filings. So this is, I mean, Ms. Babinski, you've been talking a lot about how to implement things that are on paper and how do we get staff to actually be required to do that. I would say in this case with MIPA, in terms of that statutory requirement, this has been a success. It's been required and we've been engaging at that level. Also, when these project proponents file with MIPA, they have to verify that the pre-filing meetings have taken place and that the community engagement has been taking place. They come to us for advice on that, and then they also, in their filing, show that they've done it. So these are some of the safeguards that have been put in place around this. You know, we should probably be implementing the same tactics in a number of other situations that you've brought up, you know, across the board.
Oh, thank you for the answer. I understand that this is the beginning process. I did participate, as I said before, in those stakeholder meetings. Yes. And there was one of the projects that we have here that just ended at December, and then the MIPA thing took place, or went into effect on January 1st, 2022. So yes. So that there is going to be a time, and I understand and I accept that there is going to be a time where the difficulties are going to be ironed out. The bugs are going to be taken out. You're going to see what's working, what isn't, or what did happen or didn't happen. And it'll be revisions, hopefully, that will happen. I'm just saying, if this can continue to work, and this is a good step here, getting input from the public and communities that have already experienced some of this stuff or not been involved and are been looking for something like this to happen, this kind of implementation and enforcement, whether it's to the public or internally that you're going to be enforcing it. And you want input on, is this a good plan? How will, and we're, you know, we can tell you, and you're having these meetings to see and get input from residents or organizations that have dealt with these kinds of issues in the past before this even happened. Suggest to you what may or may not work, or how you can make it work better, how you can get assistance. As we've already said, there might be agencies that out there that can do some of the legwork for you. So that's an important piece. I'd like to see this be a success and going forward and actually happen. But it's going to take everybody being on board, not just you, because across the state, you have these regional organizations, and you also have local government and local organizations too that are concerned about things like we have the Westfield Water Rivershed organization. They all need to know that this is available, what's going on here. So that's going to be communications and involvement with all of those organizations. So hopefully we can keep this going, and this will be another good step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm hearing loud and clear about the ways that we might do better in terms of engaging with the western part of the state. So thank you for that. Several people here have brought that up. And that's really valuable for us to know.
Thank you, Ms. Babinski.
You're welcome.
We have a few minutes left, but there's plenty of time. If you have questions, comments, concerns, please, this is the time. This is your opportunity to voice those concerns.
I'm very curious if people on the call have any comments on how some tools we might use to measure a baseline environmental condition in their neighborhoods. We most often talk about air or water with measurements, of baseline conditions, and then what happens through air monitoring, the ability to track, and then we're able to see if there have been improvements in any type of policy we've undertaken or any type of control technology for emissions. But, beyond the air program, are there other suggestions that people have in terms of either out west or on the eastern part of the state, ways to identify useful metrics in your neighborhoods, in the areas that you've worked?
Mr. Smith, go ahead.
Hi. I wasn't really prepared for this, but there was an evaluation of cancer incidents in Saugus that found that I believe the state funded, and it basically they said it didn't find any negative health effects in the town of Saugus. However, this study measured Saugus as a whole, the whole town, whereas the incinerator and ash dump are at the very bottom of the town in close proximity to Lynn and Revere. So I think any study should recognize that pollution isn't limited to the border of a town or city, right? It spreads. And I think that also the study didn't account for people who had left the town of Saugus over the years. So I think it needs to measure over time the same people to see how their health advances. The study did find high rates of brain cancer and testicular cancer. So it wasn't all positive for the company. And actually, the company is proposing to carry out a similar study as part of their agreement with the town of Saugus, their host agreement, which would allow for the expansion of the landfill for another 20 years. They want to carry out the same kind of study, which really isn't adequate. I think what you have to do is put air monitors around the facility and also test the water, which they don't do. They don't test the water. And they say they don't test the water because there's other sources of pollution, and there's always a lot of scapegoating and finger pointing and saying, oh, it's probably GE, or maybe it's because people are obese or people smoke, or right, or other sources of pollution. But I really believe that other sources of pollution are more reason to reduce pollution. Right, we need to consider the cumulative effects of all the pollution that's happening in an area, and it would I think if a community is burdened with an incinerator, it's too much to also have that same community burdened with a landfill, especially an unlined landfill, the last one in the state that's unlined. So anyway, I'll finish with those comments, and I did have a question which I can't remember. So I might raise my hand again, but
okay. May I just ask you that the evaluation of cancer incidents, what year was that approximately, and who was it funded by?
The Bureau of Environmental Health, Community. I think this is it. Oh wait, I might be mixing them up. If you want, I can get my facts straight and email you later.
That'd be great. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wasn't prepared for that question.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Thank you. I'd appreciate the information.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Professor Vogel would like to make a comment, so I am going to promote you to panelist. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Just very briefly in response to your question about indicators, that's something that I'll actually talk to my colleagues about and try to get some written comments back to you by the time of your deadline. But just a couple of things come to mind right away in terms of the idea that healthy ecosystems can be part actually of people's livelihoods, as well as often their cultural practices. Two indicators should be mentioned. One is don't just have like chemical and this is both related to water, which is my specialty. Don't just have chemical kinds of water quality indicators that you're paying attention to. Pay attention to biological indicators. And one of the ones that is most commonly used as sort of indicator of the ecosystem as a whole is macroinvertebrates. In other words, insects in the water. If you've got a diverse array of insects, it probably suggests that you have a pretty healthy ecosystem. So having a system of biological indicator would be very helpful. The second thing is connectivity is very, very important in water ecosystems. And that's important not just for ecosystem health, but also for flood resilience. So you may have heard of the issues of culverts being undersized or inadequate. If you have undersized culverts that are also bad for ecological connectivity, that also turns out to be really, really dangerous for flood resilience. In Western Massachusetts during Tropical Storm Irene, a lot of undersized culverts turned into dams that then turned into catastrophic failures. And that was, one of the largest sources of damage to property and cost in the state. So those are just two things to think about as potential indicators. So connectivity and macroinvertebrates.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Hodolet, I am going to promote you to panelist. Thank you, Professor Vogel.
Hello. I 100% want to support what Eve just said. Macroinvertebrates are an excellent indicator of biological health. And, as a society, we often actually poison the macroinvertebrates because we want to control the insects and kill the insects. But we need to be looking at, her expertise is in water, but I think we need to be looking at macroinvertebrates, microbiomes, and, in addition to she mentioned that we focus on chemical indicators in the air and in the water, but we need to look at soil health. So again, macroinvertebrates and microbiomes. We know that our human microbiome, I'm trained as a biological engineer and immunologist, and our health, our brain function depends on a healthy microbiome. And we get our healthy microbiome from a healthy environment. I want to just share that these biological indicators are incredibly important to me. I grew up in Massachusetts across the street from an area that was designated as a brownfield. So there was a fence separating me as a child from a very polluted, heavy metal, toxic, space. And the only thing between my house and the abandoned factory was a fence, so all the heavy metals just blow across the street. And we know what a dead zone, we know what a brownfield looks like. And so when Elliot is telling us about this ash, blowing around August and Lynn and Revere, it's really just horrible. Because when these heavy metals blow around, it kills our lungs, it kills the microbiome in our lungs, it makes us susceptible to asthma, to cancer, to all of these terrible diseases. And these chemicals that kill us also kill the healthy microbiomes in the soil, on the trees, on the, everything in our environment. So the biological indicators, I do not believe that we have appropriate biological indicators that are being routinely assessed in the communities in our state. And this is an area where I know a lot of scientists are doing some very good work. But when I Google and look for soil testing, if I wanted to take a sample from my backyard, where can I send it? There are places to send it, but I do not believe that our state has the measures and metrics for soil testing that we need in order to understand what is going on in our backyards, in our cities, in the western part of the state. And as I look at the history of our state, you know, we're a peculiar place. You know, the Industrial Revolution happened here. Massachusetts has a ton of pollution because the Industrial Revolution happened here. And as I look at the map of our state, you know, we have the rivers, which, you know, there's heavy metals in the rivers that flow through Concord, you know, the heavy metals that flow through Lincoln. So even the cleaner places are polluted because of the history of the Industrial Revolution in our state. So what is my point here? My point is that, oh yes, if we look at the railroads that cut through our state, those cut across all the town lines, as Elliot was saying, and you know, the railroads, all the soil along the railroad, you know, whether it's cutting through the city or cutting through the farms, those railroads are avenues of incredible pollution because of the history of our state. And we need to start looking at the soil testing because, you know, when pollution goes into the air or into the water, you know, it disseminates, as Elliot said, but the soil is where it's held. So understanding the pollution of the soil or the health of the soil, those are the metrics that we can begin to build on, because there are things like composting that we can do to improve the health of our soil. And as communities are trying to address the brownfields and improve the soil health, that's how we get from where we are today to a cleaner and cleaner environment that is, you know, just for all. And when I say justice for all, I also mean, you know, the animals and wildlife that live here. So it's about us, but it's also about the ecosystem, as Eve Vogel keeps, you know, appropriately emphasizing. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleen, we might have time for just one more comment. Is that?
Yes, we do have Mr. Smith, which I promoted to the panelist.
Hi again. I just wanted to get my information straight. So it was a 2016 study conducted by the Department of Public Health, and it found that there were elevated levels of cancer, especially brain cancer, among females and testicular cancer among males, as well as other health issues. But the study concluded that it was not unusual. Yeah, a major problem with this study, I think, is, like I said, it measures Saugus as a whole, and what it should really measure is the communities in closest proximity to the facility, and basically, as part of the host community agreement that Saugus and the town of Saugus and the company have negotiated, they would do this study. They would update the 2016 health study. So basically a similar study of the town of Saugus. But I think that's very incomplete and we can do a lot better. Okay, now I will stop talking. Thank you all so much for everything. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I do believe we may have time for one more, perhaps. Or if anyone has a final comment, question, we may have time for one more. If not, we'll proceed with the closing remarks. Rishi, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I think this has been very informative, and I thank everyone for coming and for their time. And I always thank the interpreters so much for making this accessible to folks and to the recorders who are allowing us to put this up on our website. Today, I believe we may have had some trouble with the recording of the ASL interpretation, but the presentation will also be repeated this evening, and we will have a sign up on the website saying that if folks need the ASL interpretation for the presentation to go to the evening presentation, not this daytime one.
Great. I just would like to remind everyone, if you wish to submit additional comments or didn't get the opportunity to speak, please email your comments to ej.inquiries@mass.gov. I dropped that email contact in the chat, so you should have that information there. As Gigi mentioned, we have additional listening sessions scheduled. The next remote session is this evening at 6 p.m. We also have another session which will be held in person at the Bruce C. Bowling Municipal Building in Roxbury. So please do check our website for more information, and please do pass the word around within the surrounding communities. In the next day or two, as I mentioned earlier, you will receive a follow-up email survey questionnaire. We would greatly appreciate it if you could please take a moment to complete the survey questions and submit the form back to us by the closing date. And as Gigi mentioned, the recording will be online. It will be on the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs YouTube channel. So I just lastly want to thank everyone. Thank you for attending, and I apologize for the little technical issues at the beginning. I hope everyone have a great afternoon. The session is now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Carlene. Thank you everyone for your time.
Bye.